to another video. My name is Sydney and I thought it would be fun to sit down and just go through all of my reads for 2024. Every single book I read, what I thought about it, what I rated it. This year has been such a good reading month for me, and it's now almost the end of April, so we've been through a whole quarter of 2024, and I want to say I read, let me count. I've read 18 books so far. Hopefully I counted right. I had some really good reads, some not so great. So let's just talk through every single one. The first book that I finished in 2024 is City of Ruin. This is the second book in the Witchwalker series. This is such an incredible romantasy series. If you're wanting something that has really great fantasy but also really great romance, I feel like the Witchwalker series does this so well. So The Witch Collector is book one. And this story follows Raina, our female main character, and she has this resentment towards the Witch Collector, who is a man who comes to her town every several years, I'm not really sure how often, and basically picks a girl to take to the Frost King. And no one really knows why this happens, but when Raina was younger, her sister was taken, and so she's just had this lifelong vengeance that she's had out for the Witch Collector. And so this story starts off, the Witch Collector comes to her city and she's prepared to fight this guy. She's prepared to kill him and use him to get to the Frost King so she can kill him as well. And what ends up happening is there's this big event, there's this big battle that breaks out, and she ends up having to go with the Witch Collector. And so they have this really long quest throughout the book, this journey where they're having forced proximity and they kind of fall in love. And there's so many good tropes in this book. It's very wintry, it's written very beautifully and very atmospheric. So there's a lot of, like, again, forced proximity, body heat to stay warm, like they're having to essentially camp together, and the tension is just so good. The main character, Alexis, he is just a cinnamon roll. She thinks obviously that he's evil, but he's really not. And so the character development is great. The plot is amazing. But book two, City of Ruin, I really enjoyed. I didn't rate this one quite as high as I rated The Witch Collector, book one, because I feel like there was a lot of world building that was happening, a lot of new characters being introduced. And so I felt that the pacing was a little bit slower in book two. There was, of course, a lot that happened, but I kind of had a hard time keeping up with it all, and I just sort of lost interest. But I have to say, the ending of City of Ruin has the biggest cliffhanger, and that alone made me bump it up to like 3.5, 4 stars. I think I initially rated it 3. So overall, I enjoyed this, but I did prefer book one. There is a novella, The Wolf and the Witch, and then there's the third book coming out in this series pretty soon, I think sometime this year. So I do definitely recommend this series. I think I'm really gonna like book three. I hope I do. And next, I read The Greenbone Saga by Fonda Lee. If you follow me anywhere, you know how deeply in love with this series I am. This is the best series I have ever read, other than like Harry Potter, which is obviously super nostalgic to me. I can't really compare anything to that. But this is one of the best, most well-written fantasy, urban fantasy series that I think is out there right now, to be completely honest. Fonda Lee does something so unique with this story. Her writing is very simplistic and she focuses on the plot and the characters. So it's not flowery writing, it's very to the point. Like, when you're reading this series, you feel so incredibly, incredibly immersed in it. So this trilogy starts out with book one. This is Jade City. Then you have Jade War. Then it finishes off with Jade Legacy. So I read the whole trilogy earlier this year, and I was just completely blown away. I don't think a day has gone by yet where I haven't thought about this. So Jade City starts off about two rival clan families. They live in an island called Kacon where the currency and the magic system is jade. And so these two families, they're extremely powerful and they control all the jade and all the wealth, essentially. And so there are so many family politics, rivals, clans, war, drama. The stakes in this series are so high, which is what I personally enjoy. I really love reading stories where it feels like anything could happen and you never really know if your favorite character is safe, which if you've read this, you know there's a lot of heartbreak, a lot of devastation, but there's also some extremely emotional, happy moments as well. And I like that this series really explores a lot about like sibling dynamics and a lot about morals as well. So there's a lot of situations and decisions that these characters are faced with where either way they choose, it's not exactly right, but at the end of the day, these characters would kill for their family and they would do anything to honor their clan. There's so many themes in this series of honor and duty, and it's just so epic. It feels so large. Like you feel like when you're reading this story, you are a part of something that is just bigger than you can imagine. And when I finished this trilogy with Jade Legacy, it's a chunky one. This last installment takes place over decades. And so what Fonda Lee does is she makes you feel so attached to these characters. They feel like family. You understand each of their internal dilemmas and their relationships so well that when the ending happens, it's like getting your heart ripped out. So if you are looking for a series that's going to make you laugh and cry and feel happy and feel sad and just go through all the emotions, this book, this series was an absolute journey. It was a ride, and I will never not think about this series. Okay, I think I've raved about this enough. I'm trying to think of anything else I could say about this to like convince you to read it. It just kind of like makes me emotional each time I think about how much this series means to me, because it's like I would rate this trilogy as a whole 10 stars if I could, if that says enough. Okay, and the next book that I read was on my Kindle. It's The Ever King by L.J. Andrews. This is such a fun pirate fantasy romance, so if you're into that subgenre, which I totally am, you will really enjoy this. So this is about our main character, Liv, and then we have Eric Bloodsinger, which is the male main character. He's a pirate. He's very just vicious and ruthless, and he has this reputation for just being evil. And he is out for revenge against Liv's father because Liv's father, the king, has something that he needs. And so what he does is he kidnaps her and holds her hostage as like a ransom situation so he can get what he needs from her father. He captures her, they go on his ship, we meet this whole cast of characters that are very interesting. I really love the way L.J. Andrews writes this story. It's very descriptive, very vivid. Like when you're reading this, you feel like you're on this high seas adventure, which if I'm going to read a pirate romance, like I want to feel like there are pirates and ships and treasures and quests that they need to go. Like I want all those vibes, and this definitely delivered on that. Only thing I didn't love about this book, which is why I didn't quite rate it 5 stars, is that the enemies to lovers aspect was a little bit rushed in my opinion. I feel like they had this chemistry and this connection pretty early on, which is fine, but for me, I was expecting more of like a slow burn, more angst, more tension, and this feels like the romance just kind of happened super quickly, which if you don't mind that, I think you'll really enjoy this. There is a second book called The Ever Queen, and I'm not quite sure if I'm going to read this one yet. I might later on down the line. Overall, I think I rated this one 3.5. I'll probably just round it up to 4. And the next book I read this year is The Starling House. I love this cover. This is a Barnes & Noble exclusive edition. The inside is beautiful. The hardcover is just glittery and shiny and smooth, which I really love. I didn't love the story as much as I expected to. It started off really good. I was intrigued. There is basically like a haunted house situation. There's a family mystery. The main character, this girl, lives in a city where they've got this big haunted house that's very mysterious. No one really knows what this mansion is all about or who lived there, and there's just a lot of like mystery and intrigue about the family and the backstory and things like that she's kind of having to solve. It started out really good. I love the way it's written. The dialogue was fun and witty and cute. There was like kind of a spooky gothic vibe about it, which I was getting very like, I don't know, like October Halloween feels. But then towards the middle, there was like this weird, unexpected romance that happened between her, and that's not really a spoiler because it happens like pretty early on, but super unexpected romance that happens between her and like the owner of this house, which he was a descendant of the family who lived there, and he was creepy to me like from the beginning of the story. So like when they started having like feelings for each other, I was super thrown off by that because I was like, girl, he's like kind of weird. And so I didn't really feel the chemistry. The plot wrapped up super quickly towards the end and it felt very rushed. But I'm really conflicted because I love the way this was written. I really loved the atmosphere and the style of it. I just feel like the plot for me personally fell flat. I think I rated this one like a 3. Like, I didn't love it, didn't hate it. I would still recommend it. Just wasn't my personal cup of tea. Next up, I read The Poison Study by Maria V. Snyder. And this book had been on my shelves for a couple of years. I think I picked this up in a bookstore a while back because it looked really good. You know how when you go to a bookstore and some of the employees there have like book recommendations and they have a little note card where they write what they felt about the book, and it kind of helps you to make a decision, because when you go into shop there's like so many books to choose from, and it's nice to have that little blurb and just a recommendation from someone. So I picked this up because one of the employees really loved it. This story is about Yelena. She's our female main character, and she starts off this book trapped in a dungeon because she's on trial for murdering her abuser. And so she's basically close to being executed for that. But she gets offered the position of being a food taster for the commander instead of being executed. So she's essentially getting a second chance at life. But it's still very dangerous of a role for her because she could be poisoned at any time. There's been many assassination attempts on the commander apparently, so she's just coming in to sort of taste his food for him first. And so in order to be a food taster, she has to be trained on all the different poisons, and she's basically being taken care of by the commander's assassin who sort of works for him, and that's kind of our male love interest. And so they have sort of a romance together. There's definitely an enemies to lovers aspect here, and it was good. Like, I really loved the premise of this book and the idea of the story, because like, how cool is it that she gets offered this position instead of dying? Like, it feels like the stakes are really high, but personally, I feel like this book read very YA. I still feel like a lot of people will enjoy it, and I've heard a lot of people say that they love this book. It's one of their favorites. I think for me, the romance just felt a little bit young. The side characters I wasn't super connected to, and then the ending did feel like it sort of went a little crazy and wrapped up super fast. I don't think I'll continue on with the series, but this was a good book. 3-ish stars. I didn't love it, didn't hate it. Would still recommend it, but I don't know, something just was missing for me. Like, I just wanted more out of this, if that makes sense. Then I read another romance on my Kindle. This is Parallel by Elizabeth O'Rourke. I love the time travel romance subgenre so incredibly much. Outlander, the Surviving Trace series is one of my favorites as well. Time travel romance I'm all about. I enjoyed this, but again, it's like I had a series of just books that fell flat for some reason. This one I wanted so much more out of. I think the reason why I didn't love it quite as much is because the time travel took place in a more modern, contemporary setting, which I'm not a huge fan of contemporary romance. I feel like there's just too many tropes and pop culture references that I just don't really love. I like to escape in books and feel like I'm a part of a world that is unfamiliar and that is new and refreshing. And I just feel like this personally was a little bit too modern for me. I feel like if there was more time travel where maybe she went back to a different time period, I would have been more interested. But this story is still really good. I think a lot of people will still like it. So this follows the main character. She's starting off the story having a lot of headaches and concussions. She's like passing out or something, and this keeps happening to her, and she's having simultaneously dreams about a man that she is supposedly in love with, but she doesn't know who he is. And she's actually engaged in the current time as well. Like, she has a fiance, and one of her headaches gets so bad and she passes out and wakes up in a hospital, and her doctor is the man that she was dreaming of. And so there's this weird connection. She's like, what's happening? There's a lot of different timelines that we follow. We're following her and his name is Nick's romance in a different timeline, and then we go back to present day, and she's trying to figure out her relationship with her fiance, and she's basically just like trying to figure out what the heck is going on. I thought this was fun. I read it really quickly. I think I read it in like 2 days, which is pretty quick for me. It's a really good, quick read, but I didn't feel as much chemistry as I wanted to between her and the love interest that she's having all these dreams about. So it was good. It was well written. I would still recommend it, but I think this is like a 3.5 for me. Then also on my Kindle, I read 6 Scorched Roses by Carissa Broadbent. This is a novella in the Crowns of Nyaxia series. So if you're familiar with Serpent and the Wings of Night, this is a novella that takes place in that same world. And I actually have not read any of the other books by Carissa Broadbent. This is my first one by her, and I was so pleasantly surprised. I loved this story. I ate it up. I think I read it in like a day and a half. It's very quick. It's a novella, so it's very satisfying. Like the story wraps up very well, but it's also drawn out enough where you feel like you have time to connect to the characters and you are really invested in the romance and the world building. So I think the tension was done so well by Carissa Broadbent for such a short book. And this one follows Lilith and Vale. Lilith is a girl who lives in a town where I think there's like a plague happening or there's some sort of curse on her family or the people that live there. Her sister is dying, she's dying, everyone's just really sick. And so she takes it upon herself to find a cure for this plague so she can save her town, save her family. And she has this idea that she's going to go visit this vampire who lives way off in a mansion. His name is Vale, and she goes to visit him, and she basically has this theory that his blood can help create this cure for the curse that she's trying to solve. And so she makes a deal with him that she's going to come to his house, to his mansion 6 times over 6 months and take his blood, and he agrees to that. And then they have this slow build romance over that time. And it's really, really good. I loved it. I loved their romance. I loved the setting and the characters and the vampire romance of it all. I thought it was so much fun. So I rated this 4 stars. Really, really good. Highly recommend if you're wanting to kind of like add to your read count with something short, or if you just want a really good palate cleanser. It's perfect for that. Next, I read One From My Enemy by Olivia Blake. And I'm also conflicted on this one because I absolutely devoured Olivia Blake's writing. I love the way she writes. This is my first book by her, and I'm hooked. Like, I love the way she describes characters. I like the way she writes dialogue. A lot of people say it's like pretentious or whatever, but I actually really enjoy it. Like, of course, they speak in terms that no one really uses in modern day, but it's still fun. It's very creative and flowery, and I really enjoyed it. Also, the cover for this, like the art inside, is incredible. So let's talk about the plot. This is about 2 rival witch families, and it's basically a modern Romeo and Juliet retelling that's set in modern New York City. And we've got a family of boys and then a family of girls, and they kind of are at odds with each other. The only thing that I mean, this fell flat for me because the magic system was not explained or described at all, and maybe that wasn't the point. Like, maybe I went into this expecting like a really well thought out fantasy, but it wasn't that. The romance was good. I felt, connected to the characters at first, but then I feel like right around halfway through, the plot just kind of took a crazy turn, and the stakes were super high, but the characters weren't acting like they were. And so, I don't know, like, people just started acting out of character, and a lot of things happened where I was just like, that doesn't actually make sense. Like, why are we making these decisions? Like, it's hard to say much without spoiling it, but I love the way this was written. Characters were really cool and interesting, and the premise was very creative and intriguing, but the execution just, I don't know, it just didn't do it for me. I honestly found myself skimming the last little bit of it, which I never do, and I was just like, okay, I just need this to wrap up. But there's so many like highlightable moments. If you're really into just beautiful writing and good character development, and you're okay with the plot taking weird turns and not making any sense, then I think you would enjoy this. I think I rated this like 2.75, but that changes like all the time. Next up is Recursion. I read this book by Blake Crouch, and this was so good. If you like Inception, if you like psychological thrillers, if you enjoy sci-fi, you absolutely need to read this. This is a really good short, quick read. I think this is like under 300 pages-ish. This is such a great author. I've also read Dark Matter by Blake Crouch, and I loved that book. This follows our main character, Barry, and he lives in, I think it's Chicago, or maybe it's New York, but what's going on is there's an epidemic where people are waking up randomly with memories that they don't actually have. So they're called false memories, and they're basically waking up with memories of a life that they've never lived, of people that they were apparently really attached to, but they don't actually know those people. And so it's driving them crazy, and it's causing them to go a little bit insane. And so the story follows multiple timelines. There's a lot of twists and turns. It's very psychological, very, again, if you like Inception, you'll love this. There's a romance involved, and I love how this book really explores the concept of time. Like, by the time you finish this book, time is going to feel like such a strange concept to you, because Again, there's multiple timelines here. Some of the timelines that we're reading about are like 30 years long, and those 30-year timelines happen over and over and over again, and you're just like, it's kind of incomprehensible at times. It's just so mind-blowing, mind-bending. Highly recommend this book. I rated it a 4.5 out of 5 stars. And then we have To Flame a Wildflower by Sarah A. Parker. Oh, I gave this 5 stars just right off the bat. I'll say that. I am obsessed with this book. This is book 3 in the Crystal Bloom series by Sarah A. Parker, and if you have not read this series, please put this on your TBR immediately. This is currently my favorite romantasy fantasy romance series of all time. I liked it even more than ACOTAR. Personally, this series is more my cup of tea. It's more up my alley. This is basically starts off as a dark Rapunzel retelling. We have our main character, Orlaith, who was rescued from her home when she was very young. Her whole entire family was killed, and so she's rescued and placed in a tower to keep her safe. And there are a lot of things that come to light. The romance in this series is so angst heavy. The tension is incredible. Like, you could literally cut it with a knife. It's palpable. It's so good how this author drips information over quite an extended period of time. I love the slow burn aspect, not only in the romance, but also in the world building. I feel like by book 1, I think a lot of people have complaints because you're left very confused about the story. You have a lot of questions. I personally really loved that about To Bleed a Crystal Bloom, because I am someone who really does not like info dumping. I don't like being force-fed information through a book. I like to make my own assumptions. I like to theorize. I like to kind of guess and have this fun game of like, am I right? Was I wrong? And what I love most about this series and this author is she does that so perfectly, where she kind of like keeps you on the edge of your seat and leaves you with so many questions that are unanswered. But book 3, To Flame a Wildflower, I had so many questions resolved, and I felt so excited about where this series is going. And it took 3 books to get those answers, but I'm telling you, like, it was so worth it. The romance in this series comes to a head in this book. There's so much just satisfaction. The spice is incredible. And by this 3rd book, you really find out that the world that you thought you were reading about is actually 10 times bigger than what you were first expecting. And I love that, because now it's like, end of 3rd book, I'm like, wow, this is actually so much more than I thought it was. And I'm just so excited to continue in this series. I highly recommend it if you're loving angsty romance, if you like the idea of a very dark Rapunzel retelling, but then it turns into so much more than that. And this series does explore some pretty heavy themes, so please check your trigger warnings before getting into it. Very dark, but so incredibly good. Oh, I love it. Then I read Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher. This was a short, very quick kind of gothic fairy tale, and I enjoyed this. It was just okay for me. I listened to about half of this on audio, which I definitely think I preferred the audio to reading the physical book. This is about our female main character, and her sister is married to a very abusive, evil prince. And so the story is her journey and her quest of saving her sister, because she makes this deal with like a witch or something where she has to complete 3 very difficult, almost impossible tasks in order for the witch to help her save her sister from this evil prince. And so there's a few friendships, cute side characters, and a few fun plot elements that I enjoyed. But I personally found this was just very lackluster. I think if you're more of like an atmospheric reader, or if you really like the fairy tale retellings where it's just very low stakes and kind of chill, then you might like this. But I just wanted more out of this. I was a little bored. It was written very well, but I probably wouldn't reread this. I'd recommend it, like it wasn't a bad book, but not a favorite. Next up is Of Blades and Wings by Eliza Rain. I was sent a free copy of this book as a gift from the author, and I was so excited to receive this because the first thing I heard about it was that it's a enemies to lovers romantasy, which obviously right up my alley. And I read this so quick. I devoured this in less than 24 hours. It is a pretty quick read. I think it's under 300 pages. Yeah, it's just under 300 pages. So this follows Princess Medivia, or Princess Maddie, and she lives in an ice fae castle with her parents, who are the king and queen, and then her sister as well. And so her whole life, her sister is preparing to be taken to this academy to learn how to harness her powers. It's like in some prophecy. So the sister and her whole family, they know this is going to happen, but Maddie ends up going instead. I'm not going to explain how, because I don't want it to like give away too much, but there's this twist that happens and she ends up having to go to the academy. And so this story is kind of like Frozen meets ACOTAR meets Fourth Wing, because there's that academy training aspect, but then there's that Frozen part where she has ice powers. And then it also feels like ACOTAR because there's all the different courts. That's like the Fire Fae, the Ice Fae, and it's just so good. I loved it. This was such a quick, fast-paced story. I was honestly invested from like page 2. I loved it so much. And so once she gets to the academy, this is about her learning her powers, and she ends up falling for, well, I guess not falling for, because it's like an enemies to lovers. It's still very slow burn, but there's a Fire Fae, and he's like complete opposite of her, and they have this tension-filled romance, which is really good. The ending is a massive cliffhanger. I was just like, wow, I wish that book 2 was out, but I think it is coming out pretty soon. So definitely get this one. I think this is actually on Kindle Unlimited too. Let me confirm that. Yeah, this is on Kindle Unlimited, and you can pre-order book 2, which is also on KU, so we love that. Next up on my Kindle, I read Secrets of Jane by Charlotte Mallory. Another really good pirate romantasy. This one's super dark. So we have a captor-captive situation. The male main character, his name is Soren. He is part of this really like vicious kind of mercenary group. He's super dominant, wears a skull mask, like all the good things there. So Jane, our female main character, she is basically being hunted by the mercenary group that Soren is a part of, and so he's trying to track her down just as a job. He doesn't know why she's wanted. He doesn't really know her story or her background, and so there's a lot of mystery involved with who Jane really is, who her father is, where she came from, what her situation is. And so he captures her to take her to the capital of the city where they're gonna like give her a trial and all that. And so he's trying to learn more about her, but then they end up having a lot of chemistry together. This is definitely true enemies to lovers. Like, she wants to kill him for capturing her. He wants to just do his job and take her to go on trial. He doesn't really care if she lives or dies. I really love the development of the story. I feel like the characters start off one way and they grow and develop and evolve quite a bit. This is super spicy, super dark, so obviously check your trigger warnings, but I had so much fun with it. I think I rated this a 4. So there was like a little bit that was missing for me, but still, all in all, I had so much fun with this one. And then finally I did it. I read Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. I say finally because I have been wanting to read a Brandon Sanderson book for years at this point. Everyone has been telling me, you've got to read him. He's such a great fantasy writer, and I love fantasy, and so I knew I would love this, but I kind of was putting it off because I'm just very intimidated by his books. They're all very long. They're all series that are a huge commitment, but I finally decided I was ready, and yeah. I get the hype now. I really get it. I was so blown away by this book. This story follows Vin, and she's part of this group. It's like a gang of con artists, and so she is an orphan. She kind of is just drifting from place to place, and so she's part of this group for a while who scams people, and the group that she's part of actually ends up getting scammed themselves, and so she is like basically drifting. She ends up part of this group of people who are planning a rebellion, and she decides to stick with them because she notices that she has these powers that Kelsier, who is the leader of this rebellion group, is going to help her harness and learn and develop. So from the surface, the story seems like just your typical like, oh, we're gonna overthrow the empire, we're gonna plan a rebellion, but it's just so much more than that. There is so much like deception and unreliable characters, and internally you have so many questions of like, who do I trust? Which character is actually being truthful? What are they really planning? What's really going on here? And the ending threw me for a loop. There was plot twist after plot twist. Like, I was basically gasping like every other page towards the end because I was just like, what is happening? This is absolutely crazy. And that's one thing that, well, one of many things that Brandon Sanderson does so well is like endings. Like, he really said, watch me flip this all on its head and give you a shock of your life. The magic system in this book is also really cool. It's all based on metals. So there's different types of metals like copper and tin and iron, and each of them has a different quality that you can pull on and burn that metal to access a different power. So whether it's like traveling really fast or jumping super high or influencing other people's emotions, like there's so many different things that you can do with these metals. And so I loved that. The magic system is so fleshed out. Like, he is so descriptive, this author, with exactly how the magic system works. Like, he's gonna tell you, and he's gonna have a purpose for everything and a reason for everything, and it's just so thorough and thought out, which I really appreciated, because I feel like in a fantasy, that part, like the magic system has to be done really well for it to feel real. Otherwise you feel like it's just too easy, or it's like the author is just cutting corners. But no, this was so incredibly thorough and in-depth, and I loved it. Loved it. I can't wait to finish the rest of the series. This is a trilogy, I think. It's a trilogy, and then there's a couple books later, or maybe it's just a trilogy, I'm not really sure, but I'm excited to finish this. And then I also want to read the Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson as well, which those books are like 1,000 pages long, so I'm gonna probably dedicate like a month of my life eventually to that series. But highly recommend Mistborn. I feel like this is a really good place to start if you're wanting to read Brandon Sanderson, but you're not really sure like what's the most digestible. I think this is a really good option. And the second to last book I've read so far this year is Look Closer by David Ellis. This is a really, really good murder mystery psychological thriller. I enjoyed this so much on audio. I kind of did like a mix of audio and reading, but the audio was just so good I couldn't stop listening to it. It's on Spotify if you want to look for it. I think it's on Audible too, I'm sure it is. But there's multiple cast of characters that are narrating this book, which I really love. All the different POVs being narrated by a different person. I feel like that just helps you sink into it more. This book is so much more than it comes across. Like, the layers in the story are absolutely crazy, but I'll kind of give you a rough starting point here. So this is about a couple named Simon and Vicky, and I don't really want to say who it's between, but there's an affair involved, there's a murder involved, and the main theme of this book, there's a quote that's really cool that just gets referenced multiple times, is the best lies are the ones closest to the truth. And that could not sum up this story any better. Honestly, there's so many different things that are unfolded within this story that make you think like there's so many times I thought I knew exactly what was happening. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna predict this. And then it completely switches directions and basically unfolds a whole new layer of the story that I did not even expect. So I really loved this. It's super fast paced and I highly recommend it. I think I rated this 4 out of 5 stars. And lastly, the book that I just finished just a few days ago is When the Moon Hatched by Sarah A. Parker. If you didn't recognize, this is the same author as the Crystal Bloom series, which I already raved a lot about that series. I had such high expectations for this book and it delivered times 100. I fell in love with this book. Like, the way it was written, the plot, the characters, like, I'm trying to describe like what this book felt. It felt like a fantasy romance that stands on its own. Like, I can't compare this to any other book that I've ever read because it's so incredibly unique. The creatures in this book are completely original and new, and even though there's dragons in this, it's like the dragons aren't your typical dragons that you hear about or read about in every other fantasy book. Like, this author takes typical tropes and creatures and fantasy elements that you feel like you're familiar with, and she completely changes them and makes them her own. And this book starts off with like a 30-page glossary, which I know turns off a lot of people because they're like, oh, I don't have time to read all that. I don't really want to get into that. It feels too much like too overwhelming. But this is one of those books that you just have to like commit to. You have to sit down and dedicate some real time and undivided headspace to this story because it's so worth it. Like, when you get into the meat of what this actually is, you're completely enthralled and you're captured by it. And it's hard to explain the plot of this without giving it away. Like, I feel like this is one of those books that you just have to go in blind and you have to just really open yourself up to it and let it take you where it's going to take you. But what I can say is that I am obsessed with the male main character, Khan. He is so intriguing, and he has a dragon, and he's one of those like brooding male main characters that you just love. There's so much mystery behind him. There's so much mystery behind her, the main character, the female main character, and there's just so many good things to love about this. And I know I'm being very vague, but again, I just feel like this is one of those books where you have to just open up your mind and go in with no expectations and just enjoy and revel in the world that Sarah A. Parker has created, because it is unlike anything else I've ever read. And easy enough to say I gave this 5 stars for sure. Okay, phew, that is every book that I have read in 2024. A lot of good ones, a lot of okay ones, and I'm just so excited to continue reading. I feel like I have such a good TBR stacked up for this next few months of the year. So let me know if you like these wrap-ups, if I should do more monthly wrap-ups or if I should do like a quarterly thing. And also comment if you read any of these books, what you think about them, and let's chat about it because I love talking books and it's fun. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.